everyone, welcome back to the Music Chat. We're going to start the day today with, I'm just going to read a verse from Luke 24, verse 29. This was referencing the folks who walked with Christ on the road to Emmaus, and they said, "Abide with us, for it is toward evening, and the day is far spent." These were words that inspired 150 or so years ago, the words that became the great hymn, "Abide with Me," one of the most tender prayers in all of hymnody. And so we're going to, with really joyful hearts, bring you the story about "Abide with Me" today. It is just one of my favorite hymns in the department of tender prayers. Beautiful words and beautiful poem that many folks like. And so we'll just be talking about the two gentlemen who gave us this hymn. The first is the lyric writer, Henry Francis Lyte, and the second is the music writer, William Henry Monk, and they both come to us from English heritage, English-Scottish heritage. So right. Barbara, tell us about Henry Lyte.
I will, and before I do that, let me just say once again, a hymn that you think you know all about, well, at least I'll speak for myself, you start looking at it, it has a whole world all of its own that we never even knew about. It's amazing.
It's always a story about these hymns, it turns out.
Yeah, it's really interesting. But Henry Lyte was a man who was born in Kelso, Scotland. And the year was 1973 that he was born. So that
19?
I'm so sorry. No, wouldn't that be nice if he were still around? So sorry. 1793. Yes. And anybody that knows me knows that I switch numbers around, so you'll understand that. And he was educated at Trinity College in Ireland, and during his time at Trinity College, he was awarded the English prize for poetry 3 times.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah, I did not know that.
He did.
Yeah.
And after he graduated, he really thought he was going to go into medicine, but he was called to the ministry, and he was ordained in the Anglican Church and started his ministry, yeah, his career in different places throughout Great Britain.
Mm-hmm.
He finally kind of ended up in, I can never say the names very well, but in Lower Bixham?
Yes, I think the first years were, I think, in Scotland.
Probably,
because it had a Scottish name, Killarney or something.
That's why I didn't want to mention it.
And so then he traveled to Scotland, which wasn't, that was common, certainly at the time. And so then he ended up more in England.
He did end up in England.
Years,
and he was there for 24 years. His last church in Devonshire.
Nice.
Yeah, in fact, one YouTube video that I saw when I was researching this showed this little place, and it's a coastal town, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And from the coast where you see all the boats, you can see the church tower, and so he stayed there for quite a long time. Yeah.
Not a bad place to be.
No, seemed like it was pretty nice. Yeah. And other than the fact, I believe he started out as an orphan and fortunately was able to be educated and that kind of thing. But he was sickly all of his life. And he had tuberculosis. And he would often go to the coast in Europe to try to get some clean, warm air to try to help his tuberculosis. And so he did often leave on little holidays for him to kind of, to hopefully feel better. But after many years, let's go back. Do you want to talk about his first encounter with these words, "Abide with me"?
Well, he was at the bedside of a dying friend, as I recall, and the person that he was with was clinging to that, what we think is probably the Luke verse. And the phrase from Luke says, "Abide with us."
Right.
And he was saying, "Abide with me, abide with me." He brought it into a more personal tone, and Light was very impressed by that, and I think he knew where the words came from too. He was a pastor, a minister, and so he just, I think he was very inspired after this person actually died, and he kind of came away from that inspired by that. And you take it from there.
Yeah, so that's where he first probably got it into his soul, those words, and how important they were for that. He was a retired priest that was dying, so how important it was for him to say those words toward the end of his life. And so, 20-some years later, he was at his health had been declining. Again, he worked really hard to try to give himself spas and whatever, but he was a really hard worker and a devoted minister to his congregation, and he knew that he was really ill, and he was preparing for a trip to go to Nice to hopefully be in the sea air and whatever. I guess Nice is by the sea. Hopefully it is. I don't know. But he was going to go to Nice anyway. I'm sorry, my geography. And his family was so worried about him because he was so frail at that time, and he just said, "I have to go and give a sermon to my people."
What was it they said about that?
Yeah.
Was it his daughter that said he used to say it's better to wear out than to rust
That's
out.
right.
So he didn't want to just sit around and die. He wanted to be doing.
That's right.
When he passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he really probably took all of his last energy to get through that sermon. And he went back before he left for Nice, and he wrote the words to this entire hymn. We're not sure whether it's all the words or some of the words, but he wrote them before he left for Nice because he gave them to his daughter.
So remind us, can you read the first verse? I know you've got the hymn book open.
Yeah,
Can you read that first verse?
It's "Abide with me, fast falls the eventide. The darkness deepens, Lord, with me abide. When other helpers fail and comforts flee, help of the helpless, oh, abide with me."
And there were, we have, most hymn books carry 4 or 5 of his original verses, and there were maybe 2 or 3 more that he originally wrote. And to me, one of the great signs of a good poet, and this is because I'm sort of simple-minded when it comes to poetry, to me a great poem makes sense to someone like me who doesn't always see the great symbolism that writers use.
Not too esoteric.
And yet to me it's beautiful, the parallel with, fast falls the eventide. It happens in a day ends, a decade ends, a century ends, a life ends. A life ends. And that parallel between your life being the eventide, the sunset of your life. For me, I love poetry that I can understand.
Well, and everybody does.
Yeah.
But the beauty of the words often takes some doing. The common words are not always the most inspiring. Eventide is a beautiful word.
It is.
And I believe that the beautiful balance of the meter is so comforting.
Right.
I know it is
well,
for me.
that and he covers, it's not just an ending song. If you look at all the verses, it's God be with us through life, the
Through
joys,
whatever.
the sorrows, the trials. You know, so it's a prayer of, you know, abide with me always.
Always, right.
You know,
Which can
here and in heaven.
which
you
can
know.
be a life, everyday prayer.
Right.
I mean,
yeah.
but I know that these words were touched by two people who were thinking about death. And in Victorian times, that was a hot topic anyway. A lot of hymns that came out of Victorian times were about death and transience. So it was just part of their kind of scope and sequence at that time.
Well, I mean, that's the point of everything, you know.
Right.
You know, we ponder birth, we ponder death. You know, the in between time is when we're trying to figure it all out.
Tell me about it. Yeah, if we ever do. I don't know about that.
So
talk about Mr. Monk.
Well, I was gonna say before we talk about where the music came from for the eventide that we use now. You know, Henry Light did write a musical.
He wrote
some music to fit the text. It didn't survive at all.
No.
You know, I understand that the hymn was sung originally first at his funeral, I believe, to his music.
I see.
His music then was never thought of too much after that. And I didn't see this except for one article, and I'll start turning. So I have here the original Henry Light music. And if you know that famous first the abide with me words that Barbara just said, you can sort of imagine it fitting this pretty well. And actually, in my opinion, it's not too bad.
Really?
You know, I think it's a perfectly good thing. I love eventide that we know now, but this is what it could have been had it survived.
It's a little too happy for me.
It's a cut time meter, and actually a lot of things I read about the one that we know, that's one of the complaints, is that it kind of dies in the water because of the
long notes,
lack of movement, and
however, when you're looking at these words, that gives you time to really ponder those words.
Yeah, they encourage in the psalmodies and everything. They always encourage not to take too slow a tempo.
No, I can see that.
But he actually
put with me.
no, I know.
It's like, let's trip down the sidewalk.
He actually put the cut time as the meter, so that's why I'm interpreting it that way. It may have been played slower, I don't know. But
I don't think so. Even all of the leaps and the intervals and so forth, just to me, make it sound like it's a little bit more joyful.
I like the first phrase though. It's gentle. I don't like the ending particularly at all. That big leap, this thing that he did. I didn't mind it, you know, except for the last phrase. I didn't care for the last phrase too much, but I truly love the melody that did survive.
And part of me reacting to it probably is because the other one is so. Right. But if you think of abide with me, and it's just abide with me.
It's a little too happy for you.
Yeah, it doesn't do it for me, sorry.
But thankfully, we might have lost the poem completely had it not been for our second gentleman. And that was William Henry Monk, who they both have Henry in their names, so I have to be careful with the names. again. And he lived just a little bit later, and so this was already in existence. He was also a musician and a writer and an organist. When I say writer and publisher, I mean a music publisher. And I'll kind of jump ahead. He ended up publishing this hymn in a hymn collection that became very popular and was like a best-selling hymn book, and which we'll talk about. But that's why it survived, is because he put it in this thing and wrote the new melody to it, and then it became famous because the hymn book was so famous.
Well, he was an organist, and he was also the choir master at King's College. Thank you. I knew it wasn't
right.
King's College, which is a big deal. So
he was from London also. He was born in London. The other guy was born in Scotland, and I think Monk was born in London. Yeah. So.
But the connection is that we think is that this, like you said, this was already in existence. I think as a poem, maybe that.
Right.
And his daughter died, and he was
a 2-year-old daughter.
Yeah,
it was a young daughter.
Yeah, and he was grieving for that. He and his wife were grieving for that, and probably those words just came back to him. And you said that it could also be because he thought of those words probably during this grieving time, and eventually he wanted to put it in the hymnal. So he wrote this music, the Eventide music, rather quickly actually, and put it with the poem, and of course it
there was some time
famous.
That from what we could figure out from reading is that when the daughter died, and there was some point of this, he and his wife kind of having this reflection together and looking out on a sunset, and we think that this was retrieved, a poem that he retrieved. He was familiar with maybe the Henry Light poem, and was inspired about it and comforted by it. And so then some years later, or some time later, he was involved in this music publishing, and they were kind of fussing around with, we want to include this, and let me read that. His wife left this account actually about it. It says, she recalled quite clearly that she and William had been standing at a window, hand in hand, still grieving. This is the first time. We were silently watching the glory of the setting sun, she wrote, until the golden hue had faded. Suddenly the words of a hymn, so there he's recalling the hymn, heaven's morning breaks and earth's vain shadows flee, came into William's mind. The hymn in question, Abide With Me by Henry Francis Light. So it already had a melody, but William was inspired by the thought of another, and he took paper and penciled the tune, which has gone all over the world. So then when he went to publish this, he and a buddy that were involved with the publishing of this volume, we're talking about, we want to put Eventide in there, and they're like, oh, there's no melody to it, but we think that actually he really had written a melody. He just had to go back and retrieve it.
I see.
I see. Yeah, I think that's, first he retrieved the poem from life experience at that moment, but then he also retrieved, the fact that he had written the tune, this other tune that he decided that fit it better.
Which he wrote pretty fast.
Right.
Okay,
we don't know. He wrote it fast according to this friend. I don't think he knew the first story.
Yeah.
So he thinks the guy wrote this in 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And really, it possibly had existed, and he just said, probably to himself, I had this tune somewhere, let me go find it.
Right.
Kind of thing. So I'm guessing, we always are on these things a little bit.
Right, and it's not definite.
Yeah, and what happens sometimes is stories survive about these things, and then updated information is found.
True.
They are able to find newer ideas, or they find more information about through those churches and whatnot, and the historians of that time, and they piece these things together. And so what was the accepted story is now changed to a more updated version.
Which makes sense, because a lot of it is oral tradition. It is written down, but it could be that it was written down after the oral tradition.
And maybe the wife's letter wasn't found for
until
many
much
years later, or something like that. But at any rate, both men seem inspired by these
losses.
The losses,
And his own death as well.
Light's own death, the death of his friend before him.
That's right.
And then Monk, had the gift of those words in his own sorrow, and then gave us the gift
of his
by
melody.
putting it in this volume.
Yeah.
And it, it's been famous ever since.
Now, speaking of that, it has a whole other life.
Yeah.
And
so now we fast forward to now.
And I think it's just because we're lowly Americans that we don't know about this. But
once again,
in doing some research about it, once again, this is sung before the major soccer tournament. Whatever, it's not a soccer tournament, I'm sure. It's the FA Cup.
Yeah. So I don't know if it's rugby. We don't know if it's rugby or soccer.
I know it's soccer. It's football. It's football. It's soccer. And the story about that is that, first of all, apparently before these, it would be like the Super Bowl for us, okay? So apparently before these games, they all join through history to sing a song together before the team.
They sang over there.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah. And up until 1927, they used Alexander's ragtime band.
That is so funny.
I know. And then whoever was in charge at that point said, I think we need to change that up, or somebody decided they needed to. And at that time, it was King George, and he and Queen Mary loved Abide With Me. They loved the hymn, and they said, I think we should use this. I'm sure there was other stuff involved, but that's where it came from. So he was at the game. He was at the game,
final.
And they sang this, and of course he loved the hymn, so it was perfect for him, and it became a tradition. And that's the thing about those games. There is a tradition of singing certain things. And one person put it, and I'll read it because I think it's pretty cool. He says, it's an annual moment of faith for a people who are not always religious. And it's a way for them to have a powerful song of unity as one people before they're begin to be divided as two teams.
Wow.
Which is pretty cool.
Yeah, that is an awesome way to think of it. Yeah.
It is very cool. So
it is not completely unlike the use of, say, God Bless America for, on seventh inning stretch, or usually it's Take Me Out to the
I'm not sure
that was a bad example. But we use that sort of not when we have the national anthem, but we have that almost as another inspiring song that's often used, that everybody loves and relates to. So it's a little bit like that.
A little bit.
I love that it's so personal, though.
Right. And I, as I said to you, I would be thrilled to stand in a stadium of 100,000 people listening to them sing that.
Absolutely.
Lifting those words up like that.
I think so.
How cool is that?
It's unbelievable, really, that the whole country would know the words to something like that.
Well, and again, as that one person said, it's a time for them to be thoughtful and humble.
And how did you put it before we started? We were talking about this earlier, and you said something about even though the teams are going to be bloodbath out there.
It's a song of unity.
But we're all still, this is our common humanity here.
That's
so that's a great thought.
I think so too.
The other opus where we talked about that, we talked about the song "You'll Never Walk Alone." So if you missed that, and you want to hear more about this phenomena of singing before sports
Soccer,
events.
yeah.
Look
Well,
up that opus.
It was picked up by rugby teams, and it's picked up by other teams,
Right.
you know, probably English associated teams throughout the world, Australia and whatever. And it's just such a very cool tradition. And
Yes.
the part of it that's so cool is the tradition itself brings everyone together, because it's something that there's a history with everyone
Yeah.
with that hymn. And so it's been so far-reaching, as we have found with many of these.
Well, that's why we picked them.
And that's why we picked them.
Yeah.
And one of the gentlemen who was also explaining about why it's sung at the soccer games was talking about how so many times in an artist's life, in a musician's life, in a performer's life, there is a moment of time, often toward the end of their life, when they do something magnificent, and that kernel of time and magnificence is carried on through years and years and maybe eternity. Just those moments, like Van Gogh, his last year, he painted his most famous paintings. And with Mr. Light, it was the last days of his life.
Yeah.
You know, so, and look what it's done. That one hymn has reached millions
Well, as
and
you were
millions
saying
of
that, I was
people.
thinking of Mozart and
Mozart, yeah.
the Requiem
Yeah.
and Beethoven and
Maybe there's
yeah.
an urgency with people
Yeah,
like
and
that.
a life of wisdom comes together.
Right, comes
you know,
together
a
at
life
the
of
end.
accumulated wisdom, I guess I should say. You know, sort of
Eventide.
comes together. Yeah,
Yeah.
there you go.
Yeah. So the gentleman that was doing this lovely little report on YouTube finished with this little verse from Galatians, if I can read it, because
Yes.
it is very appropriate, I think. He said, "So let us not be weary in well-doing, for in due season we shall reap, if we want not." We keep
Nice.
giving, we keep doing, until the end.
Well, like Mr. Light said, better to wear out
Than
than
to rust out,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, let's don't rust, Wendy. We're going to try to stay oiled.
So we're gonna, Barbara's gonna sing the first and fourth verse, first and last.
Yes, this
First
is
and last
first and last.
verse. Maybe that's the fifth verse. Out of our Lutheran hymn book, our current Lutheran hymn book. We're gonna put a YouTube link on, two probably. One, we'll find a great choir, one of the great choirs out there singing it, so you can hear all the verses. But I was telling Barbara, this is an excuse for me to once again express my love of, you know, Scottish music and Scottish heritage. With there's a bagpipe group called the Royal Dragoon Scots, I think is the name of them. And I listen to a lot of they do a lot of hymn arrangements. This group on pipes, and it's accompanied with orchestra, and they're very good musicians. Sometimes they're not, you know, sometimes when you listen to bagpipe stuff, it's not that well done, but this is always so tasteful. So I thought this would be a great excuse for me to kind of share my love of bagpipe music. And,
Perfect for it.
and we'll put the link onto that as well. That's instrumental, of course, and so you won't have the words. And I guess we should also say that the Eventide title that's the ancient name of the hymn, and Monk actually gave it that when he put it in the collection. But of course we know it as Abide With Me, you know.
Yeah.
So we're gonna let Barbara sing that now.
Lord, with me.
see you next time on the Music Chat.
Bye.